Well, hello and welcome to the ANF podcast from the ANF network with me. Oh, yeah, no, is that right? I can't even remember how to do an introduction now.
Well, this is slick, Scott. This is slick.
Wow.
This is absolutely wonderful.
That just shows we've had a break over the summer, and I just went to go into it. Right, I'll start again. Hello and welcome to episode 195 of the ANF podcast from the ANF network with me, Scott Casson-Rennie himself.
Al Coates.
And tonight we are joined by our very special guest. And I say very special because we've had a good bit of banter before we started recording. Jenny Young from Blue Cabin.
Blue Cabin, hello, lovely to be here.
Lovely to have you. We'll come to Blue Cabin in a minute because obviously the name doesn't say anything, which is great because everybody's going to be listening now going, what is this?
Sponsored by Sheds this week.
It could be. I do actually have a blue shed in the backyard.
Excellent. That makes perfect sense
already. So this is great.
Yeah. Well, shall I say how we got Jenny on? So
absolutely,
that's a good idea. So Blue Cabin, we'll get Jenny. We'll get you to just fully explain what you do. But I saw a few tweets and a few sort of Facebook posts and a few kind of just sort of danced across my social media feeds in terms of life story work. And I thought, that is a subject matter that we've constantly touched on. It's kind of woven through so much of the things that we talk about in terms of fostering and adoption and children who are in kinship and special guardianship arrangements. And we thought, actually, it'd be really good to get someone on. So I got in touch with Jenny. Jenny very kindly offered to come on and share with us her expertise and what she does and where she's based in the Northeast, I would say, Scott, where all the best people are.
Well, you say Northeast, I say South, but
let's not fall out. Not in front of the guests.
It's a Scottish in me.
So Jenny, if you could please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who or what Blue Cabin is.
Yeah, of course. So I'm Jenny, and I always introduce myself, I suppose, as a mum of a human and a dog. And I have a partner, and I live in Gateshead in the northeast of England. And I also founded Blue Cabin back in 2016. And Blue Cabin is we're now a charity incorporated organisation. We were set up as a community interest company back in 2016, so we're still quite young. And everything Blue Cabin does is focused on supporting care experienced people to develop and strengthen relationships through creative activities. And we're, I suppose, a small to medium charity. We reach as much as we can across the northeast of England, and we try and engage and deliver a range of different activity to care experienced people, ranging from our youngest participant right now is about 6 weeks old, and she's just come into care, and she takes part in our early years music making session. We do 2 of them across 2 different sites, one in Darlington, one in Redcar and Cleveland. And that's all about bringing babies and their foster carers together every single week to do early years music making to develop and strengthen bonds and attachment and support social and communication development. And our oldest participant is about 27. He's a care experienced young man in prison. And one of our projects is to support a small group of care experience, they call themselves the lads, to take part in creative activities in the prison every single week, and that's for 3 years. We're in year 2 of that right now, and so we try and reach across the age range as much as we can. And so we've got things for age ranges between 6 weeks and 27 years old, and then we share learning and training beyond the northeast of England as much as we can as well. But we're still quite a small organisation. We're not massive. We never want to be too big. We always want to stay quite small.
So you've blown my mind already, because I think traditionally we think of life story work as, and I'm saying traditionally here, I'm not saying that that's because I think there's a spectrum of life story, but you think of it traditionally being people or children and young people who actually have an understanding. But I know 6 weeks old, having a granddaughter, because I've never experienced babies to that extent before, but I'm the granddaughter, they do learn from a very early age. But what does a 6-week-old taking part in Life Story look like?
That's a really good question. And I suppose one of our projects, one of our strands of work is specifically called Creative Life Story Work. And so I can dive into that in detail, because that's more of an intentional focus on life story work with care experienced people. But I suppose what we do is we're really mindful around, from our point of view, life story work being a process that never ends, and there should never be an end point. Life story work, from our point of view, should never ever be done. So for our 6-week-old who's taking part in the early years music making sessions, we're working with the local authorities, because what we're wanting to do is to ensure that experience is logged on that child's record, because it should be, B, because it's part of that child's life story, but also if that adult then requests their records, at some point in the future, they can see that they took part in a really beautiful, gorgeous session every week that their foster carer brought them. They will find out what their favourite lullaby was, their favourite song, the song that they maybe like to clap their hands to, because for us, that is their life story. And that is something that we feel as us essential to strengthen records for children and young people and babies with care experience. It's about adding the light, because there will be light and shade. That's just, we know that, but it's about adding that light and adding that opportunity for them to see themselves in perhaps a slightly different way. And that's our responsibility, we feel, to support the recording of that in all of its forms.
Wow. I'm molded over already.
Yeah. Well, can I ask the question perhaps before that, which is, what inspired you to start Blue Cabin?
I think my first job working with care experienced children and young people was back in 2004, and I started working in what we would now know as a virtual school. And it was a job called an academic support worker, I think. And at that time, it was for Durham County Council. It was before virtual schools became officially virtual schools. And so I supported a caseload of young people in year 11 who were care experienced in broadly their education. A lot of that was spending time with them, driving them places in my car, providing them with additional support, getting them involved in as much activities as I could to broadly support them. And soon that became a caseload of year 10s and years 11s. And then soon that became, could I support a team of key workers who worked with all children? And basically that became the virtual school. And we always try to ensure that part of that experience for them was time with us, time together, making sure the relationships were strong, so that at times when intervention might be needed more strongly, like, would you like to come along to a SATS week? They knew who we were as people, and we could take them away, and it was about the relationship with the knowledge that they might be able to do a bit of study as well. And a lot of the additional activities we supported them to get involved in was creative. We would get them involved in going to theatres and dance classes, and there was something very unique about the power of that creative experience. And I know now that the key ingredients of a high quality creative opportunity are what is present in a trauma-informed, safely held creative space, and can really support that post-traumatic growth. At that time, I didn't know that, and I didn't have the language for that. We could just see that these children and young people really, really connected to the creative space. So we'd often engage and commission creative organisations. And I thought, do you know what? These are great activities. But at that time, back in 2004, it was almost like there was something missing in the practitioners. They were fantastic at their creative practice, but actually they didn't necessarily understand adverse childhood experiences. They didn't know what the impact could be on individuals who'd experienced trauma, and therefore there was almost something missing from their tool belt to ensure that activity was the best it could be. And I was like, oh, I'd love to go and work in the creative sector, but I'm not inherently, I don't have a creative skill. I'm not a musician, a dancer, a theatre practitioner, but I thought I'd love to work in the creative sector. And a job came up at Watts now called Glasshouse, what was then called Sage Gateshead, and that was to be part of a national programme called Sing Up, and that was to support children in primary schools to sing every day, and it was government funded back in Labour days of old. And there was a job within that called Beyond the Mainstream, whereby it was a national piece of work supporting children who wouldn't or couldn't access mainstream to get involved in singing. And that involved a national partnership where we commissioned arts organisations to work with local authorities to target care experienced children. And I thought, you know what, this is fantastic work, but actually working with local authorities on the other side and being in the creative sector is really hard work because the beasts, and there's so many people and the turnover of staff's high. And wouldn't it be interesting if I could maybe in the future one day set up a very small not-for-profit that had expertise of working in the local authority and creative sector to do relational work through creative activities. And so I left Sage Gateshead with no job and I set up Blue Cabin back in 2016. And so, we started a project in my hometown of Darlington and now we're here. So, that's not a brief story, I appreciate, but that's where we're at. That's where we're at.
It takes a lot of courage to make. I mean, clearly, I think when you work in that space, you work in it for a reason. You see that you're making a difference. You see what you can do, but to make that leap, you're still in the same kind of, still in the same kind of thing doing that, but when you've got your bills to pay and blah, 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 that's a massive leap of faith to actually go and do it yourself and have the confidence in your abilities to do it. And that people are going to give you work, because even though you're doing a great thing, don't get me wrong, I'm not taking away from that, but you've got bills to pay as well. It's not just about kind of doing this great work. You've also got to pay your bills. So to make that leap of faith, and clearly there's a need for it. Yeah. Otherwise, you wouldn't be sitting here today chatting to us 8 years later, and bigger. And
I was hugely supported by my partner Jed and an amazing group of people who I work freelance as well as setting Blue Cabin up so I could do the paying the bills thing. It was needed on top of kind of setting up the organisation, but also an incredible group of people, many of whom are still part of the organisation, who I know believed in the concept, understood the need. Were working, a lot of them kind of in kind and pro bono alongside me, because they were like, it just feels as though that need needs to be responded to, and collectively and together and with great partners that we formed in the early days with Darlington Local Authority, and they're still one of our main partners now, believing in us and kind of really kind of going, we're gonna give this a go with you. We wouldn't be here. And also the support of Jed and my family and Ro, who at 5 weeks old, I think I was back at work when she was 5 weeks old, but that was only possible by this incredible network of people who were all kind of alongside us. So it's a huge team effort.
So, I mean, personally, you're from Darlington, so you must be a good person.
I agree.
Well,
I would say that not everybody from Darlington is like that. Jenny, you seem to be lovely, but
it's
I've
the
got
land
a different experience of that. But
it's a land of milk and honey. It's just a wonderful princely place. But to add to, in some ways, I'm kind of like backpedaling on my introduction to you, because I kind of want to go. Actually, it feels really reductive to just kind of have this really small box of life story work, because when we say that, I think people are, well, what's the worst manifestation of that for people? What's the worst thing that looks like for children and families?
Oh God, that's such a good question. I can't speak for them, I suppose, but through our work, we now know that I think the overriding question, I'm not saying that everybody is asked this or this is the approach that's taken, but the fact that the question may be asked of a local authority is, has life story work been done? Where do you even begin with the fact that that question stimulates the response, which is, I have to finish life story work as a worker with the child or young person that I'm supporting. And the reason why I think Blue Cabin got into life story work is we had an inkling, because we're in this space, because we're supporting that relational practice, because creativity can very much be about process and working alongside. Should we step into the life story workspace, knowing that it's a statutory obligation? It's a duty. That's what all care experienced children and young people should be supported to understand. But we didn't really know that much about it back in 2016, 17, 18. And a North East of England local authority that we worked with and still work with at the time, in 2017, 18, South Tyneside Council approached us and just said, look, we've been Ofsteded. We need to do better at life story work. We have a real aspiration to do it differently. We know that some of our adults who are care experienced are now looking at their records and there's unanswered questions when they look at them. So can Blue Cabin help? And we're like, we'd absolutely love to, but we don't know enough about this. We need to find an expert, because it has to be underpinned by knowledge and practice and expertise and this safe approach. So I Googled life story work training, and Professor Richard Rose came up, who has led incredibly therapeutic life story work international, which is renowned internationally now, and just the most amazing human being. And I rang him, and he was in, I think, Australia. And I was like, hi, it's lovely to chat. Please, could we chat about life story work? Might you be able to help? And over time, what that led to was South Tyneside Council commissioning us to work with them and Richard and a team of our associate artists, because our associate artists are the wonderful people who facilitate the creative spaces for care experienced people. And we worked with the staff at South Tyneside Council and children and foster carers to say, how can we reimagine life story work, but how can we ensure that it's fundamentally grounded in Richard's therapeutic approach and understanding and the language and the support. And Richard's approach in summary is a 3-tier model, and depending upon the need of the child, you either have a 6-week intervention, a 3-month intervention, or a 12-month intervention. And some of that is supported by a trained therapeutic life story worker who's been through Richard's diploma. The beginnings, all about me, can be supported by a foster carer, a social worker, anybody in the life of that child. And we're like, oh, could we take that concept of the 6-week model and reimagine it in a group rather than one-to-one? Could that be facilitated by our associate artists? So we created a creative experience to support the key themes. Who am I? Who is in my life? What are my favourite things? Why do I live where I live? How do I feel about it all, and what's my future looking like? And what we learned about that approach is the need to ensure that life story work is never off the table. Life story work is something that can happen in the everyday. There are ways that can be recorded. There are ways that can be spoken about. Key to this is supporting the adults in the life of children as well, so that it's a conversation, and also that that social workers and foster carers need more support, because we learned that life story work was statutory, but there is no guidance for in care. There is for adoption, but there's no guidance for what life story work, what good life story work looks like. Ofsted judge on life story work, but what are they judging on, and what's their benchmark? And we were like, but this is, how are we in this position when it's fundamentally key to every care experienced child's life that they have an understanding of the past and the present, and they can explore that and process that, and at any time in their life they can revisit, they can go through that again and again and again. Why is there no guidance? And so we got some funding from What Works Centre for Social Care. We rolled the model out to Darlington and Gateshead. And as a result of doing that during the pandemic, because everything got shifted online, we then had a shed load of training, resources, toolkits, blogs. And we're like, we have a social responsibility to make this available beyond the North East of England, beyond these local authorities, because ultimately we need to support people to do life story work better, because it's not being done everywhere in a way that is okay for the care experienced population. In some places, it's done amazingly. In other places, it's not done at all. And so we then launched our sister website, which is Creative Life Story Work, whereby there's lots of stuff available free of charge on there. But also, because we're a charity and we need to cover our costs, there's some low cost membership models. And mainly we're wanting to get it out as far and wide, often just to stimulate the conversation, to raise the profile, to ask the question, what's going on with life story work? How can we help? What do you need? can we develop some more training? And Richard is still key. Professor Richard Rose is still key to this whole thing, and is still a partner and is still a trainer on it as well. So, and it's incredible. We've got 800 members now across the country.
That's not small.
Which is
it's not small. And I remember we were talking before about the Life Story conference that I organised for adoption many moons ago, and Richard was actually a speaker.
Oh, was he?
Yeah, and he rolled out his wallpaper.
Yes.
And it was just, it was an eye opener. But I guess in my eyes, we were focused on adoption back then, and some of the stuff you're saying is very true, because actually, I don't think as adoptive parents we tend to think about the foster care experience or the care experience part, where Life Story it's not mandated, as in, yes, by all means have your photographs and but there's nobody actually saying what it should look like. And the experience I have is in 2007 there was a lot of investment in local authorities for Life Story work for children placed for adoption. But what happened before adoption?
Yeah.
And then what happened when they took that away? Because obviously the credit crash and blah 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 all happened around that time, and it all disappeared. And it just went like that. So there's a lot in there, a massive amount in there that I'd forgotten about and also didn't know about, because actually you don't think about that pre-adoptive bit for us as adoptive parents. You think about what you've done since the placement and stuff, but wow.
I think that's a really good point. And through some of the conversations we've been having, we've been thinking about there is so much scope for support and conversation and training. For example, how best can parents who have adopted be supported to have those conversations with the information that you've got, the Life Story book, and how what's available so that you can have those conversations and you be supported to have the conversations. What's available for social workers who are training to have an understanding of how to do Life Story work. As far as we know, there isn't a huge amount of Life Story work training for social workers when they're training. What's available for children who are newly arrived in this country who have come into care, so that we can explore it with them in their first language. And so the list goes on and on and on as to what scope there is out there for this work. And as part of our research, we did some internal research where we went through every Ofsted report. Our local authority specialist, Joanne Stoddard, who's amazing, she went through every Ofsted report to pull out where Life Story work was mentioned. Was it mentioned in a positive way? Was it mentioned in a way that needed to be strengthened? We did a freedom of information request for every local authority in England to say, have you got a policy? What training do you do? Would you benefit from support? What was your last grading on Life Story work? And what we learned from that is that it's so inconsistent and patchy across the country. And Life Story work sometimes gets mentioned in Ofsted reports and sometimes doesn't. It sometimes gets mentioned in a particular way, but not consistently. And the support or the recommendation is often very, very different depending upon who's gone into Ofsted. And so that, from our point of view, leaves local authorities in a position where do they even begin if they need to improve? Where do they start? Probably, like me, Googling who is a good Life Story work trainer. And I suppose what we're trying to do is fill the gap so that there is somewhere they can go amongst amazing Life Story work practitioners across the country, like Katie Wrench, who already exist, who are already doing amazing work, like Polly Baines. We're not wanting to be the Life Story work provider. We want to support the conversation nationally so that people know what to do if they need to go and access training. And we're one of those, but we're not the only one. I think the call to action is find somebody. There is support out there for local authorities, but it leaves them in a very tricky position, in my personal opinion, to know what to do to improve.
Yeah, but one good Life Story practitioner can't be everywhere, so you have to
exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, you would hope that any social worker who's working would directly with care experienced children, regardless of whether that be kinship, fostering, adoption, that it would be sort of a core component of their professional development, wouldn't it? That it would be this and I'll be careful what I say, because I work adjacent to children's social workers, but often I see the language used of we need to get the Life Story work done, or we, once we've done that, we can do this. And that's kind of, it feels like a tick box exercise at the worst manifestation, which feels like that's just not what, the way you've articulated it feels much more like a baton that never hits the ground. It's everyone has their moment, be that this foster carer, social worker, nurse, nursery nurse, teacher, parent, grandpa. Everyone should be carrying this baton at some point to create this full view.
Yeah, definitely. And that sense of life story work being something which perhaps without the training, because all of the social workers and foster carers that we are working with in the northeast of England and beyond, they have this real appetite to know how to do life story work better, and they see the value in it, and they want help and they want support. I think also it's understanding how best can I go about doing that when there might be a lot of unanswered questions, and how can I hold this process safely for this child, and also how can I make sure that I am part of that process. What I often think might happen, and the care experience community will know this better than me, is that it's not necessary, that process sometimes might not be done focusing on the areas of interest or inquiry for that individual. And what we try and encourage, and I know Richard does, and our process is about, what do you want to find out about? What's important for you right now to talk about? And it might be something completely different to what we assume that individual should know about right now or should be told right now. But what is it that's interesting to you? And that might be quite a massive surprise, that it's something completely different to the thing that is missing that they don't know. But actually, they might not want to know about that, or even think about wanting to know about that, until about a year or 2 years ahead. So our creative process, and much of Richard's work as well, and I know other life story work practitioners, is about how can we shift the agency to being on the child, so that they know that they can ask any question at any point, and that will be the focus, and we can focus on that because they're interested in it right now, and we can stay on this and really support them through this thing for as long as they need, rather than going, I'm going to give you your life story in a really short amount of time from A to B, and these are all of the facts, and because I've gone through them, I think that you've absorbed this and I don't need to go through it again. And I've learned so much from being a parent, because as many parents and carers do, I must repeat myself and ask Ro or tell Ro the same thing moment to moment, day in, day out. And she's nearly 7. And sometimes I'm saying the same things repeatedly, and she will still ask the same questions, and she will still need that information repeating. And that's through my understanding of what her needs are, is that Rose's mantra, consistency, predictability, and repetition. She needs that. And therefore, if a child has been told something about their past and their care experience, and they've forgotten that in a month or in 2 years, they might need to ask again. And therefore, life story work can never be finished.
Yeah.
It just can't be. They might have questions that they didn't even know they had tomorrow. Yeah.
Scott, I'm going to ask Scott a question. Scott, have your children ever had, saying it in bunny years, life story work?
Interesting question. Because I was just thinking about it when Jenny was chatting there. And I don't think they've had any formal life story work, because I think the way that, I mean, bear in mind, we've adopted, like you are, we've adopted twice, if you like.
Yeah.
First, and then we learned how to do it properly, and then we adopted the other one and epically failed at that as well. No, we didn't, but sometimes it feels that way. But what we learned from the first time was how, and I referred earlier to 2007. There was a great piece of life story work done with the older 2 boys before they were placed with us for adoption. They had an amazing, I know we shouldn't call this, I think we should rename it actually, but back then it was called a life story book. I think in our heads, that was all they needed. And we needed to add to it with our memories and blah, 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 because their past was covered, their care experience was covered, and now they were on to this new kind of journey, if you like. Roll on 7, 8 years later when we adopted again, and there was no resource to be able to provide that same level of life story book. But actually, what we did was we made sure that life story book matched not the story, but the content, because the one that we got was like this. The one we got for the older two was like this, and there was no way in this world that we could, that we could go through life without the same for all three boys. They came from the same local authority. But the differences were massive. But in terms of actual life story work, I honestly can't say that we've had any interventions, whether it be someone sitting, discussing blah, 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 or doing creative stuff like Jenny's talking about. So I think the old-fashioned adopter like me and Al, the life story book apparently was what you needed to kind of go forward. And I much prefer Jenny's view on it, that it never stops. It does not stop, And I think the only thing that we've done is we've answered questions that we know the answers to openly and honestly, rather than going, I don't know. Well, I mean, if we don't know, we don't know, and we'll try and find out. But, it's that piece. And especially, I'd say more with the younger one, because we learned so much with the older two, we were very open with the younger one. I keep on saying the younger one. It's not like I've not said his name before. We're very, very open with Jacob about his life story, and if he's got a question about anything to do with his past, and we know the answer, we'll fill it in for him. So, but that's not, that's not. It wouldn't be the preference to do it that way.
What would have been helpful in hindsight, Scott? Do you think for you?
I mean,
for us, for your children.
I think for us and for Jacob, actually, it would just be the opportunity to know that was available, and for it to be available, rather than having to put in an application with the ASF and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. Because I think that exactly what I've just said there, it never ends. And for somebody who's had care experience, there should still be an element of responsibility for stuff that they can access. And I think that, if Life Story helps them to fill in those gaps, then that should just be accessible. You shouldn't have to apply to a fund to be able to do it this way or that way, the next way. It should just be there, and age appropriately as well, because some children and young people, grow up faster, but they're still like chronological age where, and like you said as well, they want to know what they want to know. It's not about what you think you're going to tell them or what you're going to work on with them. They might have a completely different thing. And, it's like everything else. I think that, knowledge is power. And if you don't have that experience to be able to challenge things, then you can't get it. And I think that's why, when Jacob came along, we'd that kind of gap of 7 years where we'd learned so much, and we were able to say, no, that's not, we're not accepting that. You need to go away. You need to work on that. But if you don't have the balls, if you don't have the balls to be able to do that, because you don't want to challenge somebody who's going to make a decision when you apply for the adoption order, or when you can, do this, that, or the next thing. I think that's when it becomes very difficult, if you've not got that kind of that power, if you don't hold the power to be able to do that, or that advocacy piece.
You've made me talk in there. You've made me sort of think about one of the nervousness or the issues where people become nervous is in terms of the sensitivity of some of the information. And do you support foster carers or any sort of professional or adoptive parent in terms of how to share? There's a reason children are not being cared for by their parents, and it's very rare. Well, there are no good reasons. So how do you sort of dance around? Well, that's a bit of a pun. Sorry, you create the creativity. How do you navigate some of those sensitive issues with children? I
think key to this is around absolutely linking with having the support in place to link with practitioners like Richard Rose has trained, who are trained in his diploma. So they're called therapeutic life story workers. And depending upon the needs of the child or young person or young adult, and how much they might be stuck because they haven't had or need more information about that past and the reason why they're where they're living and who they're living with. Richard has this incredible network of therapeutic life story workers that he's trained up across the country, and there are hub leads across the country who can provide that specialist support for children and young people who might need their past opening up for them in a way that's really supportive and very mindful and at a really beautiful pace, because there's a lot of unanswered for them. And so Richard's trained therapeutic life story workers are there to walk alongside the child, young person, alongside a trusted adult like a foster carer or a kinship carer, to work together to explore that in a really well-paced way. And that is the therapeutic life story worker, therefore, is able to, if they're commissioned, for example, by the local authority, they then can find out the information about the child's past so that they can safely and meaningfully talk with them about the child, talk about that with the child or young person, because some of this information might be incredibly sensitive. It might be the very first time that they've heard it, and therefore it does need to be in safe hands. And that needs to be really kind of a therapeutic process. And so for those individuals, a therapeutic life story worker, I would absolutely advocate for their involvement, because there just needs to be an understanding of that past, an understanding of the why, no judgment about that, because the child needs to be shared the information, but it doesn't need to be in a way that's judging what's happened. It's this is the facts of the situation, and this is what happened. How do you feel about that? And what does that do for you? And so, yeah, the trained therapeutic life story workers are an amazing network. And I can provide you with kind of links that you can perhaps put in the information you share with the podcast. Please. Because there are hub leads out there that you can contact. Amazingly, they are all signed up and members, these practitioners are signed up and members to the Creative Life Story Work website. So they're also a part of that network of practitioners. If you come along to one of our Creative Life Story Work live classrooms, you're bound to meet one. And we're hopefully going to commission them to create some new resources for the website as well, because often that bringing together of people to have conversations, share good practice, is another way to get life story work happening more.
I mean, I do think that Scott and I, because our world is sort of predominantly adoption, but we touch on foster care as well and kinship. What I often see is that adults, be that foster carers or adopters, that often it's they have to overcome their own challenges in terms of that information. You know, that sometimes, you know, Scott probably hears this as well. It was still, even in the last few weeks, I've heard of an adoptive child who doesn't know they're adopted yet.
I see that quite a lot still.
And you
still, I mean, that blows my mind.
Yeah. And yeah, I think absolutely. And knowing that there is support out there, and that processes from our point of view, it's about the wider family. And if I think of a kinship carer, we often reflect on life story work for a kinship carer is what support can be in place to ensure kinship carers and parents who have adopted are also supported through the process of life story work.
Yeah.
How are they supported through that process? A kinship carer, it may be that it's diving so deep into the private of their past lives as well, that they also need that additional wraparound support, as well as the child that they're walking alongside. So yeah, I think that's a very astute point, and we often think about, it's not just about the child whilst they are at the centre and absolutely are the focus. It's about, what does this mean for that family?
Yeah. Okay, she told you astute. I'm leaving now. So.
It was a slip of the tongue.
You can blank it out.
I think she meant to call me a no.
No, but it kind of, this all leans into this this assumption, and you know, that it's, just bear with me because I'm thinking as I'm speaking this, so it might come out wrong. But when I think back to the early days, and you know, a life story book was a life story book, and letterbox contact was letterbox contact, and blah blah blah. And I think what it's done is this, somebody years ago recognized that actually children and young people having this information is really useful. And what's happened is it's grown into this thing that actually, as you look at it, it kind of, there's a kind of spectrum of the children and young people and what they want to know, what they need to know. And I guess what I'm saying is that, you know, if we think I mean, for me, I like to think that we're quite a progressive family. So we have to be, you know, my children, there was not one opportunity for them not to know they were adopted because we're two men. It's that simple, you know. And they came to us when they were 7 and 8. It's that simple.
Yeah.
But for some families, it's really hard to address these issues. So I think the fact that somebody, you know, years and years ago, and it might not have even been a book back then. It might have just been like, you know, a letter or something like that. But I think the fact that we've moved on so much, and, you know, I'm thinking, you know, 8 years ago when, I think it might have been eight years ago when I did this conference on Life Story, it's not that it's moved on so much. I'm sure that knowledge was there, but it's just that, you know, the kind of the need to do this has grown to make sure that, you know, so like yourself, Jenny, and Blue Cabin, that you actually try and cover all the bases to make sure that you're being as thorough and as responsible as possible when you're doing life story work.
Yeah, and I think that certainly knowing that there are care experience people who rightly are accessing those records, perhaps because they need the answers that they haven't necessarily found. And they are now being really curious and going, oh, but I still don't have the answers, despite the fact that I thought that my records would give me the answers. It's that question, what that perhaps raises a lot of questions. One of them being what was missing from the support that they needed, or the life story work in inverted commas when they were in care that wasn't necessarily available or accessible, or the process wasn't in place, so that now they're so desperate for their care files, which is absolutely their right and completely within their gift to have, but then they also then don't get the answers from those files. What is it that is missing? And we know through conversations we've had with our local authority specialist, who also works in a regional adoption agency, about the varying sizes, shapes, quality of the life story workbook for parents who have adopted, and that being inconsistent and patchy, despite the fact that there is more guidelines available for what good life story workbooks for those who have moved into adoption should contain, and should, again, that inconsistent and patchy practice. One, we need to dive into that and ask ourselves the question, but why? Why is that there? Why are life story works therefore books inconsistent and patchy? What's needed so that they're not? What support needs to be put in place for the people who are doing them so that they're not inconsistent and patchy? And similar for social workers and foster carers, there is something that is a need out there that needs to be responded to ultimately for children with care experience, so to be able to better understand the past and the now. And it's been a fascinating process. We've met the most amazing people, including the wonderful trainers from Trauma Informed Consultancy Services, Lisa Cherry and Mary Ann Hodd, and the perspectives that we learn through them coming along to facilitate these live classrooms, the questions that the practitioners ask, the absolute incredible people who are trying to do this work better are just amazing, and they really believe in it and value it. I just think there needs to be more support out there from one could argue maybe central government to support this to be more widespread than it is right now.
Excellent. I mean, yeah, I totally agree that we do what we value, don't we? And if once people begin to understand it, then, or have a full appreciation of the benefit. I mean, I guess I look in and I think, well, we as a family, we've never had life story work, but I've always sort of taken the responsibility, and Paula, the good Mrs. Coates, we've always had the view that this is our job. As we took on the role of parenting, this is our job. So we've gone out and got the information that we needed to get, and but I know that we're probably not normal, but also my youngest,
They are not.
well, she might be, but I'm certainly not. The 3 of our children had sort of ongoing contact with special guardianship, like aunties and family members, and actually we would often have these conversations around the dinner table, about when you were little, when you're just like your mum, your biological mum. She used to do that, and it felt like that was a really organic way of doing it.
Yeah.
But I'm aware that we were incredibly privileged to have that opportunity. And just you were saying there about this having it always on the agenda, and like Scott wasn't. It feels so often that these conversations come up at the dinner table. Like when I was a kid, you'd start to tell the stories again, and so often we feel like we're like you say, we're this repetition, but it's a comfort, isn't it? It's for children, they like to hear the stories about when they were little or when you were little. The first time I met you, and your foster carer used to say this about you, and you used to like this. And even when kids are big and they roll their eyes, but they kind of secretly like it, it just creates this narrative that means you were a good child. Things were good. You had nice times, and sometimes we talk about the bad times as well.
Lisa Cherry talks really beautifully about that, and about that accessing of records, and how to write records for the adult the child will become. And I realize what you're saying there, Al, isn't necessarily about the official records. It's about the narrative and the storytelling of the past, but also that translation where possible, so that the actual records can reflect that storytelling. And I don't mean storytelling as in a made up story, but the child's story, the young person's story, and how looking back at records where the narrative is around behaviors, or the narrative is around understandably it needs to be contained, the reasons why a child or young person's coming to care, it has to, but also this narrative around what the child's favourite food was, the music they loved, and so that when they are accessing their files, or if another social worker does come on board, there is this sense of the narrative that exists about you includes the things you love and the things you enjoy and the films you like and the music you love to hear. It's not only about the things that have been really challenging and hard, and things that are around behaviors in inverted commas where you're communicating pain to us, or communicating that something's really challenging for you. Let's see ways in which the records can also contain the joy and the hope and the love that is clearly present in many of these children's life when they've been removed from their birth family into care. Let's see how best that narrative can grow and be strengthened on their records, so that if they look back or when they access these files, that narrative includes that joy and that beauty that I'm sure will have been part of their life as well.
It's been fantastic to speak to you. Can you tell us where people can access the work that you're doing? And I know that you've got a podcast as well. I mean, everyone's got a podcast these days.
I didn't know that.
We do. So you can find.
Nice chat. Bye.
If we'd have known about that, then Scott would have used his veto.
So Blue Cabin, you can find us. We are bluecabin.com. Our Creative Life Story Work website. Our sister website is Creative Life Story Work. You can Google us, you can find us there. Our podcast is the Creative Life Story Work podcast with our wonderful host, Dawn. If you would like to feature on it at any point and be guests on our podcast, please let us know. We're after guests.
I'm a serial guest on podcasting. I would love to. I honestly love going on podcasts. I'd probably love it better than actually hosting one. I don't know.
I'll set you up with Dawn, and Will is our wonderful producer of our podcast. So yeah, but we are always, and we say this often, and we're not telling lies when we say that. If anybody just wants to get in touch to have a cuppa online or in person, we are always up for that. We learn a lot from others. We're always up for cuppas and chats, and it will be good to talk.
Well, that's wonderful, Scott. I feel like this has been a fruitful podcast. My mind has been stretched.
Well, I know we've had life story work discussed on the podcast before, but not for a long time. So it's kind of great to feel this new era of it, and the new kind of things. They're maybe not new to you, Jenny, but to me they're new, because actually, especially the last nearly 6 years now, I've been living in Ireland. There's literally zero adoption support here. So, there is nothing. And I think that, possibly focusing in on FASD in Ireland, as we've been doing, has kind of taken away from focusing on adoption and fostering and stuff like that. So it is great to hear. And I'm sure that there'll be people who are listening to this who are going, it'll be a split. It'll be a split of people who are going, oh, I didn't know that. But there'll be people going, yeah, what's new in this?
Yeah.
So, information.
Absolutely.
Information. Yeah.
Well,
absolutely.
I'm inspired to leave this podcast to get my bongos out and shout facts about my child's life at them while I make them dance.
Please don't. That's actually, I think that might be child abuse. In so many ways, literally, and bongos, I think.
Do you? Yeah, I was going to say, do you play bongos or not?
Badly. But that's not the point. It's creative, isn't it? It's street. The child, I shout facts from their child protection reports at them.
Oh, no.
Have I got the wrong end of the stick?
I think you have. I think maybe you need to speak offline with Jenny and maybe perhaps do some training on it.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a course.
membership.
Yeah.
Definitely. Jenny, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you. We look forward to seeing you in the future. And Scott will be great on the podcast, I'm sure.
It's a date.
I'm a great guest. That's all I can say.
And on that note, Scott, bon jovi.
Anchovy.